Perfect. So hello everyone joining us on today's training for you all, joining us from Scottish Tech Army. It's great to have you with us on the training today. Now, before we jump in and get hands-on, I'm just going to walk you through a few things to be aware of to make sure you can get the most out of today's training. Firstly, this training is all about the different accessibility solutions across Microsoft 365. And we'll be focusing on how we can use these in order to set up our environments to be as accessible as they can, but also for things like when we are presenting and sharing or creating content inside of the different Office tools as another example. Now, do be aware today's training session is being recorded and it will be available for you on demand for the next 180 days or 6 months. To access that recording and watch the session back, all you need to do is click on the link you used to join us today, and that will take you back into the recording. Now, as this training is running as a Microsoft Teams live event, do be aware that your camera and microphone will not be in use during the session today. However, you can still interact with us and manage the session for yourself as an individual using these controls here. So at the bottom of your screen, you will have this bar. In the bottom left-hand corner, you have the pause icon. At any point in time during the training, you can pause it just for yourself as an individual, maybe jot down some notes or so on. And when you're ready, you can click play and continue from the point in time you are at. You also have the slider in the bar above, so you can drag that back to rewatch a portion of the session if that is useful for you. Of course, you have the audio control, so you can make sure you hear us nice and clearly, but Teams does also use your device's audio settings, so you can manage it from there. And in order to be as accessible as we can today, we do have closed captions turned on. You can turn them on for yourself as an individual using the CC button there. If you need to, you also have the settings wheel. This is where you can change the size and the color of the captions to really set them up best for yourself. From here, you can also adjust a few other pieces, such as the image quality. If the screen gets a bit grainy or a bit blurry, jump into the resolution settings. And you can also adjust the playback speed. So if I am going too fast, you can slow me down there. But if that is the case, please let us know through the Q&A you should be seeing on the right-hand side. If you don't see the Q&A pane, in the top right-hand corner, click on the two little bubbles with the question mark icon. That will open and close the Q&A pane throughout the session today. This is where we will answer any questions you have, so I definitely encourage you to send any through. Down the bottom here is where you can ask your questions. So in the first bar, you can type in your name if you would like this to be visible during the training. You can also type in your question in the second bar there. And if you'd prefer to ask your question anonymously, you can click the tick box underneath. And just to introduce you to your team on the call here before we jump into our content, my name is Josie and I'll be your presenter for today. And I have my wonderful colleague, Catherine, here with me as well. Now, we both work as trainers at Microsoft. We deliver all different types of training sessions out to different users. Now, you're going to be hearing my voice a lot today as I'll be walking you through the demonstration and the training and hopefully teaching you all these great things about accessibility. So I'm going to hand over to Catherine for a moment to introduce herself as well.
Thank you so much, Josie. So yes, my name's Catherine. I've been on a few trainings with you all before, but today I'm going to be the moderator for the session. So all that means is that I'm going to be making sure things run smoothly in the background and also answering any of your questions that you have in the Q&A. We did get a lovely loud and clear earlier letting us know that everyone can see and hear things okay. So thank you for that. And if you have any more questions or comments, do send them my way. Now, be aware there is about a 10 to 20 second delay from when things are shown to when you all see them. So if you do have any questions about a particular area of the training, just try and be as specific as you can, and I'll get your answers back to you as fast as I can. Otherwise, back to you, Josie.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Catherine. And thank you for that loud and clear. Great to hear or know that you can hear us. Now, just before we jump in and get hands-on, we have a few things we're going to walk through in regards to accessibility, kind of why it is so useful to set up these accessible pieces. But let's talk a bit more about what we'll be covering in today's training. So as I said, we're focusing on accessibility across the different Microsoft 365 tools. We'll look at some of the built-in accessibility tools and features within the different technologies. And focusing on features, for example, we'll start off with how we can customize our settings inside of Windows. Then we're going to be looking at how we can set ourselves up for success in the Microsoft Office applications, including some settings there. How we can also ensure that any content we're creating in those applications is accessible to our audience. And finally, we'll wrap it up with some tips around presenting to help you being inclusive for any audience, and around inside of Microsoft Teams, some of those accessibility pieces as well. So before we jump into our content, let's talk about why, or a bit about accessibility and why it's so powerful to ensure we are creating inclusive experiences. So over 1 billion people live with disabilities day to day, and the cost of failing to create an accessible experience, content, or product is exclusion. When the environment, the content we create, and the experience that we build are not accessible, our audience, impact, and potential for innovation can shrink. So really, exclusion benefits no one, and the challenge is real, but the opportunity here is large as well. And when we talk about accessibility, often in the past, it can be defined as the result of an individual's condition. But disability actually happens at the point of an interaction between a person and their environment. Physical, cognitive, and social exclusion are the result of a mismatch between what a person wants to achieve and an environment that doesn't support this. When we talk about accessibility as well, we want to think about the fact that not all disabilities are immediately apparent. In fact, 70% of disabilities are invisible to the eye. And also disabilities can be permanent, temporary, or situational. So when we think about this, you can kind of consider the idea that it likely affects someone you work with, even a customer or a client you might be interacting with, and so on. So we can see how accessibility really starts to benefit everyone. And in terms of what we'll be going through today is you'll see some different accessibility tools for different purposes or uses. So we'll go through some pieces around vision, and this is how we can make sure, for example, a device is easy to see or use without even having to have the screen kind of piece there. Hearing, how we can make sure we can easily hear or use a device even without sound. Mobility, so in terms of someone's dexterity and ability to interact physically with a device. And neurodiversity, so things like being able to focus on getting things done and those different pieces inside of our different areas. So without further ado, I'm going to jump out of my PowerPoint here, and you should be seeing my desktop. I'll just check with Kat that you have that image there.
Yep, looks good.
Perfect, thank you. So before we jump into any specific applications, let's start off with thinking about how we can really set things up to be accessible, whether it's for yourself as a user, but also if you're sharing your screen or working with colleagues in this way. It can be great to think about accessible settings that you might be using. And there might be some that are very useful for you that you haven't thought about in the past. So we're here in Windows. Now, what we can do is we can jump into the ease of access settings. So there's a whole area of the Windows settings just designed for accessibility purposes. Now to get there, you can just go to your Windows icon and click on the settings wheel and navigate through. You can use the search bar in the bottom left-hand corner here and search for ease of access, and you'll see it starts to bring up some specific settings that you can change. Or there is also a Windows shortcut that takes you straight into those settings. It is the Windows icon or logo on your keyboard and the letter U for umbrella. So Windows U, and that's going to open up my accessibility settings. Now you may see that some of these settings for myself are grayed out, like this ability to make everything bigger. And this is because I'm using a virtual machine, so I can't scale within that environment. But we're just going to walk through some settings we can use here. Now, I'm not going to go through every single option because there's so many. We could probably spend a whole hour just in the settings space, but let's talk about a few that we have here. You'll see on the left-hand side in our ease of access menu, it's organized by those different areas. So we've got our vision, hearing, and then interaction, which typically is to do with those mobility pieces as well. So we'll start off in the vision area here in our display. So this is some ways that we can make our display easier to see. For example, you can actually scale up the text across windows by using this slider here. Now mine's set to 120, maybe I'll scale it up a little bit and hit apply, and you'll see the text will adjust and adapt in all of the areas here. Now, the nice thing is I'm managing this setting in Windows, but a lot of the Windows settings will carry across to the other applications like our Microsoft Office tools. Scaling, this is actually going to scale each area, like the bottom ribbon, any icons, and so on. You can scale up or scale down to really set it up best for yourself. You'll also see we have the mouse pointer area here. Now you can see my pointer is nice and big and yellow to make it hopefully quite easy for everyone to follow here as I share my screen. So you can scale up your pointer size. I have mine on about 7, which is in the mid-range. And then you can also change your pointer color. So there's different colors you can use. You can set it to black instead of being white, so that can give a bit more contrast. The invert option will invert the coloring as you go over any items. You can see here. And then you have a color wheel, so you can select a color. I've picked a custom color. I've tried to make it able to stand out on any background, so I find yellow tends to be quite helpful for that. But you can really set it up to what you think might be most useful here. The text cursor does very similar, except for your little text icon there. So when you're typing, you can turn the text cursor indicator on, and you can then have this much larger cursor. You can again adjust the size, and you'll see here you can have that visual, and you can set the color as well. I'm going to keep it off for myself, but you can see how I can turn it on. Now the magnifier, this allows you to zoom in on your display. Rather than having to scale the display up, I can actually just have it set to have a zoom, like a magnifying glass, on my screen. Now you'll see for a lot of the accessibility settings, there is also keyboard shortcuts to turn them on and off, but I'm just going to use the turn on option. For magnifier, you'll see right now I'm magnifying my entire screen, and I've got the zoom level here. If I scroll down a little bit, oop, I've scrolled too far. There we go. You can see here the view. So rather than magnifying my entire screen, and it's going to follow my mouse as I move, I can actually have the magnifier docked. If I have it docked, you'll see at the top there, I now have this ribbon. You can expand it and make it a little bit bigger. And again, the magnifier will follow my mouse. Or you can have a lens. The lens will sit on top of your mouse, so now you can move it around, again, just like holding a magnifying glass. I'm going to close that and turn it off, but you can see how you have those different options. You can set the magnifier to automatically start up as well, and you can change the zoom level to really set it up for yourself. Continuing on, the color filters, these allow you to actually apply a filter across your entire display. So this can be useful to make photos and colors easier to see on your screen. Again, if you think about your audience, if you're creating content, you can actually apply a color filter when you look at the content to ensure it's accessible to your audience as well. So if I turn on the color filters, I'll head down and you'll see it's not actually adjusting the color of any of the windows. It applies the filter across the whole screen. So if I scroll down, there's actually a color wheel here, and right now we have the grayscale. There is an inversion filter, so it will flip the colors. There is grayscale inverted, so you can see this here. And then there are also some different color blindness filters. So you can see, again, we can follow the color wheel. We have the red-green, which is green week or deuteranopia. We have red-green red week, which is protanopia, and blue-yellow, which is tritanopia here. So you can, again, for yourself or even for an audience, can consider these pieces and apply these filters in. And again, I can turn them off if I need to. High contrast, this is kind of an alternate option. High contrast, rather than applying a filter over the display, it actually changes each key piece around our display and can change the colors for us. If we turn the high contrast on, it might take a moment. Here we go. And you can see here there are different themes you can apply. So I can say, for example, theme number 1. You can see how all the text, buttons, and different areas adjust. You can also select here and you can adjust any of the colors. So for example, I'll move this over here and hit done. And now I can apply that and even save it as a new theme. And I can actually really completely customize the way I'd like the high contrast to look. So that's another way you can kind of customize your screen's pieces here. And then the narrator. So the narrator is an inbuilt screen reader. What it's going to do is just describe any information on the screen here. So it will tell you where you have buttons, what text you have, and so on. You can turn it on from here. When we turn it on, it will open or
set narrator dialog. OK, button, Alt and O. Heads, exiting narrator.
I'm going to turn it off so it doesn't talk over the top of me, but you'll see it starts up instantly. The narrator home allows you to set up some kind of specific pieces and settings, and you can set narrator to automatically start on sign in so that it can assist you even just accessing your device. Towards the bottom here, you can adjust the narrator. So there are different voices that different people can use. They also include different accents. This can be helpful for users. You can adjust the speed, the pitch, and the volume as well of your narrator in this space. Talking about narrator, we've seen some ways we can kind of manage and work on our device screen, and narrator is really useful for being able to use your device without the physical screen, as it will read items on the screen aloud. But we also have the hearing features. So these are going to help us make our device easier to hear or again use without a sound here. Now in the audio area, you'll see the main piece that we have here is mono audio. And essentially what this is when we are listening to things, we typically listen in stereo where you have a left and a right audio channel. So some sounds can be louder on the left-hand side and quieter on the right. If you've ever noticed one of your headphones breaks, sometimes the music goes a little bit quieter, and that's due to that kind of stereo piece. Mono audio, what this does is it combines the left and the right channels into one. So no matter, maybe I can't hear, well, my right speaker is going to play all of the sounds, and so is the left. So I'm not going to miss anything coming out of my device here. You can also turn on visual alerts. So for example, for any auditory notification, you can have the screen visibly display that notification as well. So for example, it can flash the title bar, the bar across the top of the window, the entire window, or the whole screen to say, hey, you've had an alert here. Closed captions, you can set these up so that anywhere inside of Windows that you are using closed captions, it will take the closed caption settings from here. So for example, inside of PowerPoint, if you use captions, it will take these settings. Or if you're watching a video and so on and it has captioning. So you can set up all the different areas like the color of the captions themselves. And you can see at the top here, we can actually see a little preview of what these look like. Interaction features, these are how you are interacting with your device. So I'll just highlight there are different features you can turn on. For example, Windows actually has a built-in dictation tool. So if you're using an application that doesn't have a dictate option built in, you can use it's called the Windows hotkey. Windows and H to start dictation. So if I put my cursor in the settings here, I'll type Windows H. Accessibility settings. Oh, apparently I've turned off my my microphone here. You'll see here across the top, I've got to go turn on my, oh, here we go. I've not turned on my speech recognition. That would be why. Here we go. I'll turn on my speech recognition. Let's try again. Apologies, my microphone was disabled here. So unfortunately, my virtual machine is not picking it up at the moment. But you can select Windows H to dictate in those alternate areas as well. Keyboard, this can help you with making it easier to type. You've got things like your keyboard shortcuts. I believe Kat's shared a list of those. You can scroll through here and you'll see there are options around the keyboard shortcuts you can turn on and off. Filter keys, this will ignore, for example, if you hit a repeated keystroke, maybe I hit a button twice, which can help users again with their physical interaction with the device. My mouse, instead of using a physical mouse, you can use a numeric keypad if you have one on your keyboard, and you can then move your mouse around with the numbers rather than using a physical mouse, if that's useful. And then eye control, this actually uses eye tracking technology to control your mouse and keyboard. It does require a supported eye tracking device to be set up and linked to the computer in order to be able to support this. So this is how we can move through, and we've got all these different settings. If you can't find a setting, of course, remember you have the search tool and you can search with colloquial language in there to be able to find information relevant to yourself. And now that we've set up kind of my Windows, my whole device here, we're going to move across into, oh, here we go. I turned on speech recognition, but I forgot to continue setting it up. So I would just go through the process there, but we'll leave that for today. And we can continue on. So now we're going to move across to our Microsoft 365 apps. But before we do this, I'm going to check in with Catherine if we have any questions or anything else to add here.
Yeah, we just had a question come through, which is a great one, saying, are these settings for individuals to set up for themselves listening or watching a presentation, or from a presenter's perspective? And I think it's a bit of both. So some of the settings that change how Windows works for the individual, such as setting up Narrator, using Magnifier, for example, mono audio, color filters, things that change the individual's experience would be something to be set up, I would say, generally by the individual who is watching a presentation, for example. However, you can still make use of some of those features as a presenter, such as increasing your screen scaling, maybe using Magnifier to heighten certain parts of a presentation, and also, of course, having your mouse cursor be larger and more bold as well. So a bit of both in that respect. So if there's anything else you'd like to add to that, Josie, feel free, but there's no other questions.
Perfect. Thanks so much for that, Kat. And yes, I completely agree. It's kind of both sides. You as a presenter can think about, if you are sharing your screen, how you can be accessible to your audience. But if your audience is watching you from their own device, they can also, of course, set up any really individual pieces. And that's something as well to highlight. I like highlighting as well things like the color filters can be useful for kind of making sure any content is accessible before you even share it with the audience, but maybe you don't need to apply the color filter on your display as you share your screen, depending, because you could have a mix of audience there. And that's where it's more of that individual piece. So now we're going to switch over, and as I said, we're going to go into our Office applications. Now, oops, I've started with Outlook. I meant to start with Word. I think the color there of the two icons got me confused for a second. So here I am, I'm in Microsoft Word. Now you might see some of the scaling looks a little bit different here because I applied that setting to upscale some of the text. You'll see it's a little bit bigger in some areas of Word, like my ribbon at the top here. So hopefully this helps you guys with watching today's training. But what we can also do is, whilst we can apply those Windows settings, that helps us tailor our experience in Windows. You can also do this within Microsoft 365 around some accessible pieces. So each Microsoft 365 application actually has its own set of features or accessibility settings, but they're quite similar conceptually. So we're going to go to File, This is how we can navigate to the ease of access settings built into an Office tool. File will bring you to kind of this backstage area, and down the bottom you'll see options. If we open this up, we get our little dialog box, and in here we have an accessibility space. So this allows you to jump into any Office application and manage the accessibility settings for that specific tool. So for example, I'm inside of Word here. I can do things like having the accessibility checker, which we're going to look at later on. I can actually have it running in the background, and in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see here, it actually tells me when I need to check my accessibility. And there's all different options you can turn on or off again. So as an individual, you can set up your accessibility settings in each of the Office tools. The other thing I want to highlight is I'm going to go back to File, and we're going to be moving through different Office tools today here and looking at accessibility in some different spaces. But a lot of the pieces, again, they're going to apply across multiple. So for example, I'm here inside of Word, I've gone to File, and when I go to New, of course, I can start a document completely from scratch. But you'll also see here there are these document templates that you can start from. So starting from a template is going to have some of the formatting and pieces built out for you. And you can actually find templates that are accessible. So if you go to this search bar and type accessible, I can filter down and only see those templates that have been checked and confirmed they are an accessible template. Then I can scroll through here and I can actually start from an accessible place rather than having to go back through later on and fix any pieces. So I actually have a document already that is started from one of these templates. We're going to go back into it by hitting that back arrow, and I've used there's a report document style that we can have here. Now, what we're going to look at is some recommendations around creating accessible content. And this applies to kind of all of your Office applications, no matter which you're working in. So PowerPoint, Outlook, Excel, Word. We're inside of Word here, but these tools really apply for all. So first things to think about is choosing a readable font style. So you can see, of course, you have your different fonts. Now, fonts that are Microsoft Fluent fonts, you have Calibri or Sitka. They're intended to help readers with things like visual crowding, which is sometimes associated with dyslexia. Or also the Comic Sans font is also proven or shown to help users with dyslexia when they're reading text due to the size and the shape of the characters. The other thing to think about is being aware of font contrast. So having a contrast between the background and the font itself. So light text on a dark background or dark text on a light background like we see here. Think about the size of your font as well. So typically a size 11 is quite good in your Word documents. If you're in a PowerPoint document, because it's quite visual in nature, typically size 18 plus font is useful there. So think about those pieces and think about visual crowding. Using things like lists and bullet points can help as well with accessibility. If anyone's reading this document and they have a screen reader, when they get to a list, there is actually a bullet list here. It will tell them that this is a list of information that they are looking at in this space. Also with a table, we're going to look at tables inside of Excel, but if we inserted a table in Word or in a PowerPoint document, if we insert it as a table and we use a header row, again, we'll look at what this is later, it will actually tell the user with the screen reader, hey, this is the header of the table, and then this is the information listed underneath that header. Also, if you insert pictures, it's important to have alternate text. So alternate text or alt text is, again, when someone is using a screen reader, they may not physically see this image. So instead, it tells them what is here, so they don't miss out on that portion of the document. When you have an image like this one here, you can right-click on it inside of your Office application and head towards the bottom here and you'll see Edit Alt Text. Otherwise, when you select the image, you'll see in the top ribbon, I can go to Picture Format, and there is an Alt Text button here as well. This will open up the pane on the right-hand side. Now, you can just generate your alt text yourself. You'll see here it gives you some tips around what you should explain or describe from the image. All of the Office applications also have artificial intelligence built in. So here it can actually generate a description for me if I select that. And here it says, okay, there's a large glacier with ice. It tells you the confidence level of this description, and I can actually even add more in. So I'm going to say a large glacier with ice and a large pool of blue water in the center, surrounded by mountains. And that's what we can see here. You'll also see for some images, you may not need alternate text. So there is this option here to mark it as decorative. So when something is visual, but it's not actually informative to the document itself, maybe a border around the edge or things inside of this space, mark them as decorative instead. You don't need it to read out loud what that is to a person using a screen reader there. The other thing that we can do is we've spoken about some best practices around accessibility in our different Office tools, and a lot of it focuses on that font piece and how we can make sure it's nice and clear and visible to our audience. But the great thing is before I publish or share any content, a good best practice to follow is just as how before you share or print your document, you head to review here and you check the spelling and grammar. Well, along with that, what you can also do is check the accessibility of your document here. So you may have seen, remember before I turned on Accessibility Checker to run in the background. In my bottom left-hand corner now, it tells me, of course, how many words, if I have some proofing errors, but it also tells me there's some accessibility to investigate. Now, if I click here, it will actually take me to the checker. Or again, in the top ribbon, head to Review and click on Check Accessibility, and this will open up the accessibility checker for you. So let me make this a little bit bigger. Now, the great thing about the accessibility checker is not only will it call out any issues, you'll see it will have warnings and errors. Warnings is saying, hey, this is likely inaccessible. An error is something definitely inaccessible, and we should likely fix that. But also when you have a warning, like I've got quite a bit of hard to read text here. If I select the text, it will highlight the area of text. And I don't know about you, but I can't actually see that there is text here on this document. And down below here, it also tells me why I should fix it, how it's going to make my document accessible, and the steps on how to fix this. So for this one here, I need to increase the color contrast. Now, what I can also do is click on the down arrow on the right-hand side, and it gives me some recommended actions. So here I can change the font color, for example. So I've got a dark background. I want a light colored font. And now you can see how much easier it is to follow that text there. And then we can go through and keep checking the accessibility in our document and fixing up or reviewing any errors that we need to as we go. So that's some accessibility pieces inside of Microsoft Word. Next, we're going to move over to PowerPoint. And now a lot of the pieces, again, that I've gone through in terms of some best practices and recommendations around accessible content, as I said, they're going to apply across each. As we move over to PowerPoint, apologies, I'm going to again check in with Catherine. My PowerPoint's just having a moment loading up. There should be some color on these slides, but Kat, any questions as we go?
We did get one question from Leslie saying, is there a reliable source to get up-to-date info on the best fonts for dyslexia and etc.? That is an incredibly good question. I am going to just do a little bit of digging online to see if I can find an official source. Otherwise, a few that you can always use are going to be Calibri, Sitka and Comic Sans. They have been designed for that purpose in mind. And also just a note to you, Josie, feel free to close and reopen your PowerPoint. Same thing happened to me last time when I was making changes to my display in my virtual machine. So it may be that just reloading it will sort of kick it back into gear and you'll be seeing the presentation you expect. There we go.
Thanks for that, Kat. I was thinking maybe it's having a bit of a moment here after I changed some settings. So here we go. So here's our PowerPoint presentation that we have. Now, remember, of course, PowerPoint presentations, they tend to be highly visual. So you want to consider, again, particularly your audience who may be blind or have low vision, and making sure that they can understand your content and your slides when you're creating them with accessibility in mind. So again, you can go to File, you can set up your accessibility settings in PowerPoint, and you again have those accessible templates that you can start from. Of course, we think about the same pieces, so contrast between our text and our background. The other thing to think about as well is if you have a block of text, and maybe I want to highlight this piece around limited reach or strength. So I changed the color of that to make it stand out in that sentence. Now, it's important to ensure color is not the only way that you convey information. So to make this text stand out, I've made it red, but I could also make it bold or underline it as well. And now it will stand out even more, even with those users who might not realize this text is red here. So think about that and make sure color is not the only way that you represent or highlight things inside of your slides. The other thing to think about is as you add slides in the top left corner here, when you click on New Slide, it is useful to use these inbuilt slide designs. And if you scroll through, you'll see there's a whole host of different slide designs. It can depend on the theme and the template that you start from. But the good thing about these slide designs is if we again talk about, for example, users with a screen reader, it knows the order that the content in this slide will be in. So it knows the title comes first. Then maybe it's going to explain this image, read the title below it, and this text box. Over to the next image and down. Rather than just going across my slide left to right, it knows the built-in order in there. So that's going to kind of convey that reading order. And again, we're going to talk about tables in Excel, but using tables with a header row is useful again for those pieces. So just like with Word, PowerPoint does have an accessibility checker. If you head across to Review, you can check the accessibility and we can see again any errors or any warnings inside. Mine's having a bit of a moment. There we go. Inside of my slides here. So again, I can go through and I can adjust and make sure here. Now, again, we have errors, warnings, and tips. If it is an error, it's telling you there's content in the file that is very difficult or even impossible for someone with a disability to use. If it shows as a warning, it's saying, hey, content in most of the cases is going to be difficult for people with disabilities to understand. That's a warning. And then a tip. When there's content that people with disabilities, they can understand, but it could be better organized or presented. There's a way you can improve their experience. This will have a tip area here. So that's how we can kind of categorize or go through the accessibility inspection place here. So we can go through and again, fix and adjust any of our pieces or our errors inside of this document. For example, I think there is an item missing alternate text, so I can jump to that item and set up the text just like we did before. I can click the drop down and I can add a description and I can type in my description here. So I can say a child with a laptop on a bed. That's not how you spell bed. There we go. And I'll close that, go back to my accessibility checker and continue through. If I go down to maybe another error here, I can see we have a slide title missing for some of these slides. So this is bringing me to the area where I can add the slide title. I can actually hit add from here, and I can say, well, this first slide is investing in accessibility. And I'm typing over the top of my lovely title there. So I'm going to remove that and actually use the built-in slide title option. And you'll see on the left-hand side, it now actually knows the name of this slide. And again, for things like screen readers, it can read that out. Under warnings, we also have this check reading order. So for this first slide here, when I talked about the reading order, it's saying, hey, okay, you've got some issues with your reading order in this first slide. Again, I can hit the down arrow and verify the order. So this is what we mean by reading order. It goes, okay, well, item number 1 is actually this circle here. So it's going to read the alt text. Then it's going to go down for me and so on. But actually, I added that title in last. So you can see right now it's going to read the title as if it is the last item on the slide. But likely I want my title to be first. So I can grab it and drag it up to move it to the top. So now it will read the title first and then go through the items. You can also select a specific item and use the up or down arrow to change the order as well. So we can just make sure it's set up for success. So again, those users with a screen reader are going to experience things in the best way for themselves. Now I'm going to close that up. We've applied some of those changes, and again, I can keep working through my accessibility checker. But the other thing I want to do is talk about how we can start to think about our slides and the way we present them in an accessible capacity. So one thing we can do is when we're building out a PowerPoint deck, if we have a video that we insert in this deck, I've got a video on this last slide here. Now, what I can actually do is add closed captioning to this video. Now, I have a closed captioning file I'm going to add into the video. You can generate your own closed captioning files and save them as a .vtt file type. This is the file type that needs to be used in order for it to be a closed captioning file. It is a bit extensive and you do have to list things like timing and so on in your video. So if you're using a tool that generates closed captioning, like a transcription tool, you can download that file and then use it. Just ensure it is a .vtt file type. So the way we can insert our file or our closed captioning on the video, I'll select the video here, and in the top ribbon, we're going to go to playback. And you'll see here on the right-hand side, the insert captions option. So I'm going to click on that and it will open up my file explorer. And now I can go and find my VTT file. So I'm going to use this one here and I'll hit insert and the captions will now apply to this video. You'll now see underneath the video here, I have the little closed caption icon. If I click on that, I can choose which caption file. So you can have multiple caption files, for example, in different languages on a video. I've selected this one, and now when I play it, even if it's just explaining the sound that is here, it's useful to have that captioning so no one misses out on the content of the video that we're preparing or presenting here. The other thing that we can think about in terms of our presentation is we can also have closed captioning from PowerPoint when we are running a slideshow. So if we go across the top ribbon and head to slideshow, you'll see on the very right-hand side, there are the captions and subtitles options. Now I actually have it selected in my environment here to always use subtitles. So when I open up PowerPoints and I start presenting, the subtitles will automatically be there for me. Or you can just set it up for this specific time period if you don't tick that option. So we're going to say subtitle settings, and we can go through and set them up. Firstly, you have your spoken language. Of course, this is the language you are talking in. You might hear I have a bit of an accent, so I've selected English Australia. so that it captures what I'm saying, any colloquialisms or any slang or any, pardon me, changes in the way I pronounce words in here. And there are different English options, but there's also other languages as well. You can also select the language your subtitles will show in, so it doesn't have to be the same as the spoken language. The subtitles can actually live translate for you, but for now I'll keep them in English. We can set which microphone we're using, and then where we would like the subtitles to show. So I'm going to have them below my slide, but think about how your audience are looking at your slide deck and where you'd like them located. Now I'm going to start the slideshow, and you'll see because I've set the subtitles up to capture, down the bottom now as I'm talking, it's capturing what I'm saying. I haven't typed these in anywhere before time. It's just going, okay, this is what Josie is saying. It might not capture names very well sometimes. It actually got my name perfectly there. That's one thing to kind of keep in mind. You'll also see it's using my closed caption settings. So I set up closed captions on my computer to be yellow, and now we can see that here. During my slideshow, I can also turn the captions on or off at any time in the bottom left-hand corner by clicking on the subtitle button, and I can open them back up again. And then from the 3 dots, you can go back to your subtitle settings and move them around. So we can move the subtitles, but we can also change, for example, the language. So maybe I'll speak in English, but I want the subtitles in German. I'll hit OK. And now you'll see as I'm talking, it's actually capturing what I'm saying and translating it as well. When you do have it set to translate, what it will do is capture word for word what you're saying, and then it will adjust, you'll see as it did there, it adjusts the grammar and the formatting as it goes, as it realizes the sentence that it's structuring. So I'm going to jump out of my slides, but that's how we can have captions on our subtitles, no, on our PowerPoint here. And the other thing you can think about is, as a presenter, we kind of spoke before, is it up to me to set up those settings and those pieces, or can my audience do that too? Well, as the presenter, of course, you want to be inclusive in your delivery as well. So another thing you can do is actually in the slideshow area here, there's this option called Rehearse with Coach. Now, what this does is it actually coaches you through as you deliver your slides. So I can say Rehearse with Coach. It's going to start my slideshow, and now I'm going to say start rehearsing. So I'm going to practice my slides. So now we're talking about investing in accessibility. We're going to talk about vision, making your device easier to see or use without a screen. And we're going to go through a few different things here, and I'm going to talk to you about some stuff. And whenever I'm done, I can hit pause. Now, I did do some things on purpose there. You might have heard some changes in the way I present. And I'm actually going to hit escape, and I'm going to show you the little rehearsal report that I got here. What it's going to do is it's going to give me some feedback. So it tells me how I did, how my pacing was. I actually started talking really quickly at the start there. You can see my pacing just jumped straight up, and then I started slowing down a little bit more. So I kind of stayed in that green area. If I'd gone a little bit more fast, it probably would have been very bad. I also used a lot of filler words, so it tells me here about that and how I can think around that. I can take my time a little bit more as I go through. I wasn't repetitive in my language. I also was quite inclusive. If you use phrases like you guys, it will pick that up and say, hey, here's an alternate phrase you can use instead. But I do need to work on my originality. I was just reading my slide out loud. So it's saying, hey, maybe think about this and how you can change it. So I can actually adjust and kind of learn from the presenter coach built in here. And again, we're going to talk quickly about accessible content in Excel. Now, again, I'm going to close this Excel and reopen it because it was having a bit of a moment there. Maybe if it wants to let me open, here we go. Here's my Excel document I had prepared earlier. And what we want to talk about here is just a couple of tips. Now, again, you've got those same concept around font styles, sizes, and colors, but a couple of best practices specific to Excel itself. Firstly, if you are working in an Excel document that has multiple sheets, when you have a sheet like sheet 2 here, this is completely blank. So it's actually not useful. I'm going to remove it. So I'm going to right click and delete it. And the reason for this is, again, if someone is using a screen reader, it will actually read out the sheet names and tell them what information is here. There was nothing in sheet 2, so there's no need for it to read that out. The other thing is sheet 1 does not have a unique name. So I want to give it a name that is descriptive of the content in this sheet. So I'm going to right click here and rename. And we're going to call it fruits and veggies, because that's what we have in this space here. So now people know, okay, this sheet has information pertaining to fruits and veggies. The other thing we can do is we've got a whole list of information here, and I'm actually going to select all of the info we can see. Now, right now, this information is just entered into my Excel. But what I can do is I can actually format this as a table, and it's going to make it easier for people with visual or cognitive disabilities to find information. So I've selected it here, and I'm going to click in the home section, format as table. You then have some inbuilt table styles you can select. I'm just going to choose one of these top ones here, and I've got my data. You can tell it if you can tell Excel if your data has headers. Mine doesn't at the moment. I'm just going to click OK. And now you'll see it will insert a header row. So I didn't have a row with the headers of what information was in each column, but I've made a header row. A header row is useful because it tells people this is the information in this column. So for example, here is the name. Column 2, I can tell it, well, what type of data? What do those numbers actually mean? And I can fill in that information. You can turn this feature off by unticking the header row option, and you'll see the row does disappear there. Having banded rows is also useful. You'll see banded rows will alternate the color of every second row. So it just helps you discern what data relates to each other and between your separate rows. The other thing that you can do is, again, you can also have a chart inserted. So if you have a table of data, you can actually create a chart from that table. So if I go to home, I'm going to go to insert and select a chart. I'm just going to pick a chart here. So we're going to say a column chart and insert it. When you do have a chart inserted in your document, you can actually have alternate text on the chart as well. So it will explain the chart just like it might explain an image elsewhere. So again, you can right click, select edit alt text and set up text to explain this chart for anyone who might have any visual needs here. And lastly, in terms of our Office tools, we're going to move over to Outlook. Now, again, in terms of Outlook, you want to make sure all those same pieces around alternate text for images, contrast, and so on. Outlook does also have the accessibility checker when you're formatting an email in your review area. But the other thing I want to highlight with Outlook is if we go to File, and we're going to go to access this account on the web and click on this option here, it's going to take me to the Outlook web app. Now, the reason I've gone here is because there is an option built in currently in the web app that you can turn on. And basically what you can do is if you are a user with accessibility needs, you can tell your colleagues when they email you to remind them to use the accessibility checker. So you can click on your settings when it's appearing here. Apologies, I think because I'm zoomed in a little bit, my settings wheel has disappeared. Let me zoom out, there we go. Click on settings and you'll see down the bottom, view all Outlook settings. And I can go to general and then accessibility. And there's an option here called ask senders to send content that's accessible. Now, when someone types my name into their email in the to or the CC line, it will remind them, hey, Josie would like to have accessible content. Maybe use the accessibility checker before you send your email. And it even gives them a button they can click to open the checker up. So it reminds people that I have this ask or this need around accessibility for my emails. So that's our tour through all those different pieces around accessible content in the Office tools. And we're going to wrap it up by looking at some quick accessibility pieces inside of Microsoft Teams. But again, I'm going to check in with Kat if there's anything to add or any tips she'd like to mention before we continue on.
Yep, so coming back to that reliable source to get up-to-date info on best fonts for dyslexia, etc. Unfortunately, I can't find a Microsoft resource that actually lists a selection of fonts. However, as we've said, Calibri, Comic Sans or Sitka are always good choices. And as a general rule, having things, fonts that don't use serifs, so sans serif fonts are always a lot easier to read. So there are some other online resources from other locations, such as some government resources that you might want to check out. And I've also suggested internally that we maybe put up a list like that, because I think it would be incredibly useful. But otherwise, back to you, Josie, for a quick look at Teams.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Kat. So I'm going to open up my Microsoft Teams environment, and we've got it open here now. Some of these pieces around accessibility you may already be aware of in Teams, or we do call out a couple pieces in our other trainings. If you were on any of them, apologies, just lost my English there for a second. But just a few things you can think about. Firstly, inside of Teams, you do have built-in accessibility pieces like your settings. In your top right-hand corner, if you click on the three dots there, firstly, you have a zoom option. Now, this will scale up every area of Teams and zoom it all in for you. You do have the inbuilt keyboard shortcuts. So just like Windows, Microsoft Teams has its own set of keyboard shortcuts, and you can actually use them. For example, you can navigate through Microsoft Teams without using your mouse. So there's a whole host of different areas, and you can scroll through here. There's keyboard shortcuts that pertain just to meetings. For example, one that people can find very useful is Control-Shift-M will toggle your mute on and off, and you can unmute yourself during a meeting, maybe if your mouse disappears for a second there. Another one is Control and then a number will take you to that relevant item in your left rail. So Control 1 is going to take me to activity, Control 2 to my chat, and so on. So there's all those different accessibility or keyboard shortcuts. In your settings area, just like Windows and Office tools, you have accessibility settings you can apply to Microsoft Teams itself. So there are the different themes like dark mode. This can be useful when you're working in a low light environment or to be less harsh on your eyes. And then high contrast is designed for that accessible purpose, as we went through before. Also, in general, if we scroll down, there is a language area. So each user can set their Teams language to be their native tongue within here. There's over, I think, 60 different languages available now. And the other thing about the languages is when you set up a language, when someone sends you a notification that might be in a different language or a message in a different language, let me have a look if I have one. Here we go. You can see this message here. I cannot read that, but I can click on the three dots above that message and select Translate, and it will translate into the system language I've set for Teams. So for me, it's translated to English, and I can still, apologies, I can hover over and it will tell you with this little icon here what language it translated from. So Sebastian actually sent that message in Polish. So that's another accessible tool that can really help us. Anyone can speak in their native language, and Teams has the built-in translate option. Some last quick things. If you want to focus when you're working in Microsoft Teams, remember you have your status options. Do not disturb allows you to focus. It will stop you from receiving pop-up notifications or sounds on your device, so that can be distracting. And also to highlight, if you are in a call or a meeting, you do have inbuilt accessible settings there as well. A couple of tips. If you are presenting in a Teams meeting, it can be useful to turn on the background blur as it removes any visual distractions behind you. And then remember, if you're running something like a presentation, a good tip is doing just what Seb did here and actually sharing the presentation or visuals ahead of the meeting. So if users would like to, they can open it on their own device. I do understand sometimes with confidential or other information, you may not want to share it ahead of time, but it's a good best practice tip. The last thing I'll highlight is if you are in a meeting, I'm going to turn my microphone off, how you can access the closed captions. Now be aware the closed captions, each user chooses to turn them on for themselves. So they can go across the top ribbon, click on the 3 dots, and down towards the bottom here, turn on live captions. It will act just the same as it did inside of PowerPoint there, but it gives you live captioning inside of Teams, and it even tells you who says what. So if I say one thing and Catherine says another, it tells you which user in that meeting said that line. So that's just a couple of tips around some accessible practices inside of Microsoft Teams, and I hope that does help. Apologies, I know I ran a couple of minutes over, but I hope that's useful for you all. Again, a reminder that this training has been recorded and it is available for you to watch for the next 180 days or 6 months by clicking on that link. Now, Kat's just sharing some great links in the featured section of the Q&A. You have a link to the Disability Answer Desk. This is a great resource for support issues relating to disability, assistive technologies, and other documentation, along with some other resources as well. And we'll also be sharing the feedback link for our internal Microsoft feedback form. So if you do want to give us any feedback on how today's training has gone, remember you can click on that link. It will open up the feedback form and you can give us some ratings on today. But otherwise, I'll just say a thank you from me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye, everyone.